Hi everyone. Well, it's a rainy day here on Baden Hill, but we're going to keep the sunshine coming, and hopefully this video will be a little bit shorter. It's a connecting video between the last two segments and the big ones that we've got coming. So today we're going to talk about the alliance system, and we've already hinted that there are all these relationships building. Some of these relationships have to do with politics and shared interests, because if there's a really powerful country, then another country will want to have friends so that that really powerful country doesn't invade them or try and take over some of their territory. So part of it's politics, part of it's a shared heritage. You have certain countries that have people that have a lot in common. Austria and Germany, Russia and Serbia. And so that's a big part of it as well. In addition, you have some very strange connections because these royal rulers that were still lingering in Europe, they were related by blood. They were family. And families do have good times. They get along. And other times they hate each other and they are rivals for power. So that's a little bit of background. We're going to talk about alliances, which means an ally is somebody who you trust and who will support you no matter what, in the good times and in the bad. Sometimes you have trade relationships with an ally, but for the most part, it's a military relationship. And so alliances are systems of having allies. And in the 1800s, because of that Congress of Vienna and the Holy Alliance that developed, that was a model for future alliances within Europe. And to some extent, it helped to keep the peace because it was balancing power. It was making sure that a country that wanted war knew that war was going to cost a lot. And so we call it a deterrent. When you deter something, you keep it from happening, right? So the main thing is alliances can be helpful. Today, we have an alliance called NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And that alliance was very important during the Cold War to keep World War III from happening. So alliances can help, but back in the 1800s, communication wasn't like it should be. And as a result, alliances led to fear, and many people believe that alliances triggered war. So let's talk about the first alliance. It's the Triple Alliance of 1882. Okay, so we're going back in time a little bit. We're still in the 1800s, even before Kaiser Wilhelm II died, and we had the three Kaisers in 1 year in 1888. Well, this was a time of turmoil, and the Triple Alliance was an effort to make sure that the whole situation with Italy and Austria didn't explode. And so what's really interesting is that it involves the three players, and we'll talk about them. The three players are Germany, Austro-Hungary, or Austria-Hungary, Austro-Hungarian Empire. There is no Hungary, sorry. And Italy. Those three, okay? And they formed this alliance. So let's talk about this. These are monarchies. These are empires. And even Italy is a monarchy still. Remember Mazzini? He wanted to have a democracy, a federal republic, but he was put down. His ideas were not accepted. And so you have these monarchies. And in Germany, you have a new monarchy. So what's going to happen? Because we know that today most countries are democracies. Monarchies are a thing of the past. So this is kind of the end, the death throes of monarchies. And one of the oldest empires, I will just mention, one of the old man of Europe was the Ottoman Empire. And that is mainly Turkey, but included all of the Balkans at one time. And so we need to know about the Ottoman Empire and how the Ottoman Empire was crumbling. And so was Austria-Hungary. It was crumbling. And so, you know, Germany doesn't want things to fall apart around it. It wants things to be strong and stable. Otherwise, it will have lots of enemies. And so the Triple Alliance was formed in 1882, and interestingly, Italy was involved. Italy was trying to have colonies in Africa, but basically France was pushing Italy out of Africa, and so Italy was more aligned with its enemy, Austria, and a country that it had fought against for so long. So Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy formed the Triple Alliance in 1882, and it would last all the way into World War I. Now, to counter or go against this Triple Alliance was another trio, another alliance. And think about the countries that we have left. We have Russia, who is very close to these countries, Austria-Hungary, and pretty close to Germany as well. And so basically Russia sees that they're in danger with this Triple Alliance that has formed. And so Russia needs allies. Well, remember that Nicholas II was cousins with somebody. He was cousins with Wilhelm II of Germany, but he was also cousins with George V in England. And so what you have is this alliance that grows between Russia and Britain, and also the country that had been defeated by Germany in 1870 in the Franco-Prussian War, France. So France needs somebody to join with. Now, France and England have not always been enemies. They fought many, many wars. And France and Russia hated France because of Napoleon and Napoleon's invasion. So this is kind of interesting how this all developed. Basically, to counterbalance the Triple Alliance that had formed with Austria-Hungary and Germany and Italy. So this happened in 1907. And again, a lot of it had to do with the unrest in the Ottoman Empire as different countries started to break away and gain their independence. Serbia gained its independence. Bulgaria, Greece. Now, Greece, again, that's a European country, but it was under the influence of the Ottomans until there was a revolution. And remember, I discussed this. There was a British poet named Lord Byron, and he went to Greece and he fought for Greek independence. And so Greece got its independence. Bulgaria got its independence. Serbia got its independence. And that is triggering this fear and unrest. And so the Triple Alliance had formed, but now we have a Triple Entente. And clearly the word Entente, E-N-T-E-N-T-E, it's a French word. And so it's a name that included the French. And maybe it helps you understand if you remember that is a French name, that France was a part of it, and France is close to Britain. So at least you get the UK and France in your alliance. And then you have to remember that Russia was on the other side against Austria-Hungary and against Germany, which had been Prussia before, remember. So France, Britain, and Russia became the Triple Entente in 1907. And in addition, you have Russia's friends in the Balkans, and namely that is Serbia. The Serbs were Slavic peoples or Slavonic peoples, and they were related by ancestry to the Russians. And so there's a close relationship. Serbia, after independence, wanted to kind of stretch its territory a little bit. And it actually wanted to include an area called Bosnia. But Bosnia had been given to Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, by the Ottoman Empire. And so basically when Bosnia, which is it's a coastal territory on the Balkans, when that was taken over by Austria-Hungary, the Serbs were not happy. And there were many Serbs living in Bosnia. And some of those Serbs wanted, again, Serbia to invade Bosnia and take over. And they were called Serbian nationalists. And we will talk about how a group of Serbian nationalists, including a man named Gavrilo Princip, that group was the seed that started World War I in one sense. And so Serbia, they don't like what Austria-Hungary has been doing in Bosnia, and Serbia feels threatened that some of their territory might be taken back and they won't be independent anymore. And so they call to Big Brother Russia, and they need help from Big Brother Russia in case there is a war. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. Now, in this short segment, I just want to tell you that I actually left off some of the most famous and most discussed elements of the beginning of World War I for my slide that had the list of topics. So I'm just going to start off by saying many people in history have learned one story that started World War I. And I have been to the city where World War I started. It's called Sarajevo. And Sarajevo was in Bosnia. And Sarajevo was a place where there were many different kinds of people living. And so there were Serbs, there were Austrians, there were Muslims, there were many different kinds of people. And remember, this is the leftovers of the Ottoman Empire, so you do have a lot of Muslim people. Well, the Serbian nationalists wanted Austria out of Bosnia, and so there was that. But Austria-Hungary wanted to show that it was in control, and so it sent basically a military parade. The Emperor of Austria-Hungary, was Franz Joseph. Franz Joseph was the emperor. His son was the Archduke, and his name was Franz Ferdinand. I'm sorry, not son. His nephew was Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand was the young, up-and-coming heir to the throne, and he was going to go to Sarajevo in Bosnia, and he would be in a parade that would celebrate Austria-Hungary. But it was also rubbing it in the face of the Serbs that they had lost. And this parade actually took place on the anniversary of a famous battle in the 1300s when Serbia lost at Kosovo. Now, Kosovo is a current European country, and there's a lot more to that story. But just remember that everybody has a long memory in the Balkans, and they know all of the bad things that have happened in their past, and also the good things and the victories. And so this parade was very symbolic. Well, one of those Serbian nationalists we talk about, the group was called the Black Hand. Sounds very scary, as John Green would say. And so Gavrilo Princip was one of the members of the Black Hand, and he single-handedly shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and people would say he started World War I. I have been to Sarajevo. In 1990, I actually visited what was then Yugoslavia and went to Bosnia and Sarajevo, and I stood in this exact spot where Princip shot his gun. How do I know? Because they actually made a little monument on the ground. It's like Hollywood. They have footprints where Gavrilo Princip would have stood to shoot Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, I want everybody to understand that this is the famous beginning of World War I, but it took a month for World War I to actually start, and it took a lot longer than that beforehand for all these conditions to develop where war would be inevitable. And so here's basically what happened. The Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated. Remember all those political assassinations we've already talked about. Tsar Alexander II, Wilhelm II of Germany was targeted 3 times. Abraham Lincoln and President Garfield, even in the U.S., and McKinley as well. So just know that Austria-Hungary was going to do something about this because one of its royal family was assassinated. It was going to punish not Bosnia, because that's a part of its own empire, and not just Principe, but also Austria-Hungary believed that Serbia was behind this assassination. And so Austria-Hungary wanted to punish Serbia and issued an ultimatum, which means they have demands for Serbia that they need to do certain things. So Austria-Hungary gets things going by issuing this ultimatum. And before that, they had to be very careful because Austria-Hungary knows that Russia is going to stick up for little brother, and Austria-Hungary knows that Russia's army is really big. They may be ill-equipped and untrained, but they're really a big army, the biggest army in Russia, in Europe. And so what happened is Austria went to its brother country, Germany, and said, will you back us up? And Germany, you know, Kaiser Wilhelm II was somebody who was very militaristic, and he basically said, sure, we'll back you up. And he said that the promise he made is called the blank check, saying whatever happens, we'll take care of you. We've got your back. And so Germany was ready to support Austria-Hungary, but no war had happened yet. In addition, Germany made an alliance with the Ottoman Empire, which may have been crumbling, but had control of the Dardanelles, which are the straits of the Black Sea, where ships have to go through from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea. And it was a very critical point. That's where the Trojan War was fought because it was such an important waterway. And the Ottoman Empire controlled it. And so if Germany was an ally with the Ottoman Empire and controlled that waterway, guess what? Russia would have been choked off and wouldn't have access to the Black Sea for its ships. And remember, it's hard for Russia because a lot of its ports are in the cold water and they freeze during the winter. So the Black Sea is very critical for Russia. And that, you can see this game playing that's going on. You also have a lot of colonies around the world, especially in Southeast Asia. And these colonies were used for resources. Remember, there was basically a new kind of slavery there, but you had German New Guinea, which is an island in, you know, part of it's in Indonesia, but part of it is the independent country of New Guinea. You had Samoa, another island. You also had a colony in China, which this is kind of bizarre to many people, but it was a German colony in China, and that's why it's called Qingdao. And Qingdao beer is still very famous because Germans produced beer there and then the Chinese took over. You also have Southwest Africa. Germany did get involved in the scramble for Africa. So you have all these colonies that are involved in mobilizing their resources to be a part of this war when it happens. And finally, you have Bulgaria. Now, Bulgaria had basically just been very successful in what was called the wars, the Balkan Wars in 1912, 1913, and the Balkan Wars were basically these Balkan countries at each other's throats, and Bulgaria was a winner there, but Bulgaria needed more status. They needed to join together with the Ottoman Empire, their former enemy basically, and Germany, and so things are shaping up as people are mobilizing. But really, it's the next portion that we need to pay attention to. Now, to make a long story shorter, if I can do that, because Austria-Hungary is issuing this ultimatum to Serbia, Serbia needs help, and basically Russia is going to help, and Russia and France have this alliance, so France is going to help. And so Russia knows that it's on the verge of war, and as a result, it starts mobilizing its troops. It did not declare war. It just moved its troops to the border to be ready for war. And this leads Austria-Hungary to declare war on Russia. And that's significant because, you know, you don't have a war until somebody declares war. So it's debatable who started everything, but Russia was ready to fight. Austria-Hungary wasn't even ready to fight when it declared war. It took 2 weeks for it to get its troops together. So you'd think that Russia would have a great advantage, but remember, they were ill-trained and ill-prepared. So France gets into the war, and as a result, Germany is called to action because Germany is sworn to help Austria-Hungary. Germany hates France and wants to put France in its place, and so really World War I becomes all about getting to France quickly and ending the war quickly. Eventually, you would have many others join this movement. So far you have Russia, France, and Britain, but you would also add countries like Japan. Japan had an alliance with the UK, with Britain, and so they enter the war when Britain enters the war, and we're not quite there yet. China as well. A lot later than Japan, and as a result they had a huge disadvantage, and Japan was the one who ended up getting something out of this alliance. You have Belgium, Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, Romania, and finally the US in April of 1917. Very late, and only about a year and a half that the United States fought in the 4-year war. So I want to explain Belgium's situation. Belgium was the superhighway. It was the Low Countries and the place that the Germans could use to get through quickly and get to France and conquer France and end the war. So Belgium, even though Belgium wanted to be neutral, wanted to stay out of everything, they were not a part of an alliance, Belgium ended up being the battleground and again the superhighway. Once Germany invaded Belgium and was going to push its troops through, that's when the UK, when Britain entered the war against Germany. And so Belgium then was under attack. And so many of the posters that were made trying to get people to support the fight against Germany and Austria-Hungary, they mention Belgium. They say, "Remember Belgium." And one of the most famous poems about the war is called "In Flanders Fields." Flanders is the base of operations in Belgium that was set up by the British, and so many troops died at Flanders, in Flanders Fields. So once the Central Powers mobilized, the Central Powers refers to that Triple Alliance. Then the Allied powers mobilized, and that refers to the Triple Entente, which became the Allies. So now, in the war, you have new names. You have the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary. Italy pulled out and said, wait a minute, we don't want to be a part of this, and they tried to remain neutral. And so you have the Central Powers, and then you have the Allied powers, which is France and Britain and Russia. I hope this makes it a little bit clearer, and we're heading to full-scale war. Finally, we need to discuss why. Why did this war happen? And I've tried to hint all the way through. I've left a trail of breadcrumbs for you to see how this war began. And it's taken me a long time to build this up because it's very complicated. So let's start with the main thing. There are isms that are at work in Europe in the 1800s, leading into the 1900s or the 20th century. The four main isms are nationalism, as Italy, Germany became nations, and also as all of these little Balkan countries are gaining their independence from the Ottoman Empire. They are nations. Russia wants to maintain its empire, but it's a national identity, and it's tried to Russify, to make all these territories Russian, even though those people groups are not Russian by nature. They have their own family languages. So nationalism is rising as people want to have power against someone else or another country. Militarism is building up the military in support of your nationalism. And remember that technology is a big part of this. We'll talk about that. Imperialism is stretching your influence globally. Even if it's not a place nearby your country, you go there to have colonies and get resources and sometimes to get soldiers in times of war. And that's imperialism. And you also have alliancism. Now that's my own word. It's the alliances, but we'll call it allianceism, where you have the Triple Alliance, the Triple Entente, but you also have, connections between Serbia and Russia, and it's a powder keg waiting for a spark. And yes, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was a kind of spark, but there were other sparks as well. The second cause that we'll talk about is culture and language, and that leads to nationalism, but it's the idea that you have these relationships based on your language groups. So Germany and Austria, they are connected, and Russia and Serbia, they are connected. And so it's very important to see that culture and language, we're tying certain groups together, and we're also shutting out other groups of people. Jewish people were oppressed in Russia. And anybody who was different, gypsies, they were different from some of these people groups. Remember, the idea of Germany was based on race, and that is going to lead to Hitler in World War II eventually. Number three, you have modern technology, and this is the height of the Industrial Revolution, as finally every country in Europe is beginning to industrialize, building railroads, wanting to compete, wanting to have their economies grow. Well, there are all kinds of inventions too. Thomas Edison was inventing like crazy, motion pictures, and other people were inventing steam power and steam locomotives, and that just led to one invention after another. And specifically, you have the Gatling gun or the machine gun. And that is an incredibly terrible, destructive weapon. But you also have others, airplanes, that, the Wright brothers, right at 1900, were inventing airplanes along with many other people. But that meant that transportation was going to be changing. You have these powerful trains, you have planes. Transportation means that you move troops much more quickly than in the past. And because of that, sometimes things move faster than you can control. Some people would say that trains led to World War I, because when Russia was mobilizing its troops, it was getting its troops to the places they need to be. In addition, then, Germany would mobilize their troops, and because of their mindset that you had to keep trains running on time, that it was very difficult to stop mobilization once it had started. And if a country sees another country mobilizing their army, they're going to get ready too, and eventually it will lead to conflict. That leads us to number 4, modern communication. You have the telegraph, you have the wireless being developed, you have ways for people to communicate, and unfortunately it's not perfect, but it does mean that things like we will talk about the Zimmerman telegram. Germany could communicate secretly with Mexico by telegram, and that by telegraph, and that would be a major part of why the United States joined the war. So modern communications, mass communication through the radio, that hadn't started happening on like network stations, but it did happen with soldiers communicating. And so This is a very important thing, that you are building a mass audience that moves more quickly, and that leads to bigger wars. And finally, the fifth one is propaganda. Propaganda that sounds good, and propaganda that we understand is not a good thing. We talk about ideology, and that means your beliefs and your belief system, and you want everybody to agree with that. But you also have just ideals. One ideal is democracy, and many countries, like Britain, they believe that they could fight a war to establish democracy. This is true for President Wilson in the United States eventually too. To make the world safe for democracy was the battle cry. And that means that you could get rid of these kings and have democracies in Europe instead of monarchies and authoritarian dictatorships or autocratic rulers. So, ideology. What happened is posters were developed. This is mass communications, right? When you have advertising that's put everywhere to promote slogans, and the imagery on the posters was very dramatic, and you will see examples, I'm sure. So the main thing is propaganda got the people at home fired up to support the wars. But you understand that it may not have been true all the time, and people fight wars very often because they hear ideas and they believe them without knowing all the facts. I hope these videos have helped you understand how we're at the brink of war, and we will talk then in the next video about how war develops and how it became not the war to end all wars, but another chapter in human history. Thanks for watching.